Good evening, everybody. How's everybody doing? Good, good. Thank you for joining us tonight, spending your evening with us for this important panel and community conversation. So my name is Michael Burrows, and I'm director of the Kegley Institute of Ethics here at CSU Bakersfield. And on behalf of the Institute, our board of directors, thank you for joining us tonight for this event we're titling Homeless in Bakersfield, a Community Conversation. We organized this event, as with all of our ethics panels, with the aim of bringing our community together across differences of position and place to learn, to question, and to engage in respectful discussion. And that's really a core piece of what we are as an institute, is kind of trying to address pressing issues in our community, understanding that we have different positions on those issues, but there's something ethically important about us coming together as a community to discuss them respectfully and to think about how we can best serve our community. Homelessness is our focus tonight, and it's a topic that is both pressing in our region and our nation as a whole. It is a topic that raises important questions. What are the root causes of homelessness? How will we respond to homelessness as individuals and as a community? And what resources already exist in our region to address this issue that we can utilize? Our panelists this evening are experts on homelessness, both in terms of their lived expertise and also in their work on the ground and homelessness support services. So we have a lot to learn from them. I'm super excited to have them with us tonight. This program, I want to note, is made possible due to the financial support of the Kegley family, Adventist Health and Kaiser Permanente, and Kern Schools Federal Credit Union. And I also want to thank Dean Asher and the CSUB Library for hosting us in this wonderful venue tonight. And a special thanks to our event moderator this evening, Mr. Chris Ballard. Mr. Ballard currently serves as the Director of Compliance for the Athletics Department here at CSUB. Prior to joining CSUB, Mr. Ballard was an associate attorney at the law offices of Lang, Richert, and Patch, located in Fresno, California, where he worked on various civil litigation disputes. And prior to his time as an associate attorney, Mr. Ballard chaired the City of Wasco's Planning Commission and worked as a community organizer with a local nonprofit named Faith in Action, Kern County. As a community organizer, Mr. Ballard worked with various community leaders on projects ranging from combating the 2008-2009 foreclosure crisis, tackling the achievement gap, and reducing crime in low-income neighborhoods. And I'm now going to call Mr. Ballard up to introduce our speakers for tonight. Thank you very much.
Good evening. Good evening. How are you doing? Thank you all for being here. Tonight you are in for a treat. So in terms of format, I am going to do brief intros of our panelists. After that, I am going to invite the panelists to speak for roughly 15 minutes on the topic for tonight. And then afterwards, we will open it up to you all, the audience, for a Q&A session. So I think you all have note cards on your seats. Does anybody see note cards on their seats? Awesome, awesome. So as the panelists are speaking, please jot down any questions you have and pass them to the side. So keep that in mind. And there will also be opportunity to ask questions on the sides as we have microphones placed as well. Okay, let's get started. Bios. Our first panelist is Mr. Louis Gill. Yes. Hello, hello. How's that? Okay. Feels a little bit better too when I grab the mic. So our first panelist is Mr. Louis Gill. Mr. Gill oversees the Bakersfield Homeless Center, and he's been at the helm of leadership there since 2000. Under his leadership, the Bakersfield Homeless Center has transformed into a family and child-focused organization, which also specializes in helping single women in crisis. Other accomplishments under Mr. Gill's leadership include, among other things, developing Small Steps, which is a specialized child care for children of homeless families and children that have witnessed or experienced domestic violence or sexual assault. In 2003, Mr. Gill received California State Senate distinction by appointment to the State of California Domestic Violence Advisory Council. Despite his accolades, perhaps his greatest role has been that of father and husband. Please welcome Mr. Louis Gill. Our next panelist will be Shawn Morrissey. Mr. Morrissey is currently the Director of Advocacy and Community Engagement at the Union Station Homeless Services Center in Pasadena, California. As a practitioner of the Housing First model, which acknowledges first and foremost housing is a basic human right. Mr. Morrissey is a licensed substance use disorder specialist and holds a harm reduction certification degree from York University in Toronto, Canada. For the past 16 years, he's worked in the field of homeless advocacy and social justice with a focus on mental health and substance use disorders. He is committed to working alongside chronic and vulnerable homeless individuals and those living with complex mental and physical health challenges, all in order to reduce barriers, change inequitable structures, systems and practices, and to create access to community-enhancing, permanent supportive housing solutions. Please welcome Mr. Morrissey. And finally, our last panelist, who gives me just a bit of joy to introduce her, Dorothy Edwards. Dorothy Edwards, formerly homeless, is an advocate for those still suffering on the street. Seeking policy change, Dorothy shares her story of lived expertise on the local, state, and federal level. She is an inaugural graduate of the Corporation for Supportive Housing Speak Up Advocacy Training Program, and she also serves on the National Board of Directors. Dorothy has been recognized as a Congressional Woman of the Year by California State Representative Judy Chu of the 27th Congressional District. Please welcome Dorothy Edwards. So with that, I'm going to now turn it over to Mr. Louis Gill.
Thank you. Good evening. Wow, that's a little hotter than I thought it was. So first I want to say thank you very much to the Institute for putting this together. This is a very important conversation. I'm glad that we're continuing to have these discussions here in Bakersfield and in Kern County. We have a lot to do. And I'm going to be as brief as possible because I'm really excited about hearing my other panelists speak. I hear myself talk all the time. So we're going to start off with our slides. So homelessness is the issue. When I got the opportunity to hear a group of California mayors speak, I heard the mayor of San Diego tell the governor, it's not an issue. It is the issue affecting our state and affecting every major city. This is a difficult thing. California holds 25% of the nation's homeless population. That is a significant amount. So, as you can see, what I'm going to try and do is set the table for you, describe what's happening in Kern County, and then give you a sense of the services that we provide and how we've responded. So this is our latest data. So in 2019, we had our largest amount of volunteers out for our point-in-time count. We are required to go out and do a count once a year. We made contact with 1,330 people. That was a significant increase over the year before. I have yet to hear anyone say that they believe that the population living outside is being reduced. If anything, what we hear is the pressure that everyone is feeling because of the number of people that we see living outside. It has not been the case that we have expanded emergency shelter in a number of years in our safety net. That has remained fairly consistent for quite some time. This is just a breakdown of some of the numbers of individuals that we saw. We saw increases in areas that you don't want to see it anywhere, but anytime we see significant increases, we have to say, okay, what's driving that? How can we respond? To break down the numbers further, you see that unsheltered and adults, we had over 770 individuals, unsheltered. Those shelter beds remained, as I said, fairly constant. We had a slight 2% increase in those people sheltered. That's not because we added on. That's because we crammed in cots, cribs, mattresses, wherever we could try and give someone an opportunity so that they don't have to stay outside. Unsheltered saw a dramatic increase. We saw a 118% increase in unsheltered individuals over 2018 to 2019. That's a rough number, isn't it? So who is it? Mostly adults, 89%, 11% children, primarily male, the population 70%. And how do we break that down? So one of the things to note, there is a disproportionate representation of African Americans in the homeless population. The African American population of Kern County is about 6%, yet they constitute 15% of the homeless population. You'll see that the vast majority of homeless individuals in our county are white. Now, known conditions. These are conditions that individuals self-reported to us on the point-in-time count. So we know that if you have somebody that just walks up and starts asking you questions, even if you agree to answer, it's not likely that everyone is going to be 100% forthcoming. So we believe these to be light. Still, 29% reporting severe mental illness. 51% reporting chronic substance abuse. Veterans, 10% of the population. And year in, year out, people fleeing domestic violence hovers around 10%. Now, what are the factors that we're fighting here in Kern? The blue is the national level. California is red. Kern's green. We have much higher rates of poverty in our county than the rest of the state. It's fairly typical for the San Joaquin Valley. Unemployment, even though employment has been getting better, we consistently see higher levels of unemployment in Kern County than the rest of the state. So that's something that we fight. Now this is something that has affected the entire state. So now we're talking about fair market rent for the largest areas. So for those that can't see in the very back, it goes from Los Angeles down to Kern. Now in Kern, for a 2-bedroom fair market, it's $926 a month right now. But if you just go back 2 years, it was $844. So that may not seem like a huge increase, but year over year with the increases, it gets very difficult to maintain housing. One of the other things that we have that is a phenomenon in Kern, because we have had less expensive real estate, it was possible to buy homes for under $125,000, and you would get investors from out of the area that would bundle together several homes, create an LLC, and then begin renting those out. As the pressure increased for being able to invest in that type of real estate, because it was very affordable, it began to drive up prices because there would be increased competition for those homes. That in part is why we have seen this increase in rents on the lower end of the scale, at least in our county. So what's being done with all that? There's some information and why. So I need to give you a little bit of background first. So Kern County, like the nation, has responded to the federal government's, we'll call it encouragement, for us to follow a housing first model, which is, in the past, individuals had to, for lack of a better term, get well enough, heal enough to earn the right to get housing. That's not what the housing first model is. The housing first model is no matter where you are, no matter what's going on, if we can get you into a home and then put the appropriate supportive services around you, we get better outcomes. We get people more stable, and the truth of the matter is it's less expensive. We have a study here in Kern County that was done last year, Jim? Yeah. And it's a little over $20,000 a year for every person we can take from the streets and put into a permanent home in savings to the community. So we are all working on a housing first model here. Because of that, the available investment, meaning resources available to provide services, have shifted from services and shelter to permanent housing subsidy. So that means we've been helping more people maintain a home. That has created an unintended consequence, because as the homeless population has grown and there has not been an expansion of emergency shelter, it has created a problem for, let's call it, the front end of the system. So there's nowhere for folks to go off the street when you have maximized that resource. When you have every bed full, right, so we're supposed to house 174 people a night. We're going to probably have about 200 people in our place tonight. Okay, so everybody's trying to do more with what they have. We need to increase capacity for a number of reasons. The city and the county are feeling a great deal of pressure from constituents for people that are camping outside, and that they cannot enforce an anti-camping ordinance if there's nowhere for someone to go. It's not legal. If you can't have a bed for someone, then you can't say move. So they would like to see that opportunity for them to be able to get somebody into a facility so that there are additional services. What is going to be critical when we invest in those shelters is that we have to have individuals that provide services to people. And what that is a fancy way of saying, we have to develop relationships. You have to care about people, and they have to believe you care, because that's what changes lives. So right now we see the entire state and also the city and the county responding to that need in the front end of the system and also the supportive services. That's why we've seen so much in the news about low barrier shelters, low barrier navigation centers, and different services. So the Kern County Homeless Collaborative, which is now the Bakersfield Kern Regional Homeless Collaborative, we've been renamed. There's a little rebranding for you. We are a consortium of service providers and entities that are dedicated to trying to do something about this crisis, because everybody deserves the dignity of a home and everybody deserves to feel safe. So how do we do that? And so as a group, we come together, and it's everybody from behavioral health from the county to Clinica Sierra Vista and Independent Living Center. There's a ton of us out there doing the work. There are some things that we're required to do according to HUD, which is Housing and Urban Development's guidelines. We have to have a coordinated entry system. So that means that everybody goes into a single database, they get assessed, they get in line for assistance for housing. Everybody that gets services if they are homeless. It is required, and it is a great deal of effort. You can imagine trying to find every individual that is homeless in Kern County, get their information, and then put them in a single database. We're required to do the point in time count, which is the data that we showed. It's basically a census. We're allowed 4 hours on a given day once a year. That's the rules. It's a little wacky. It's the way it works. And then we also participate in something called Built for Zero, which is a consortium of communities that are working towards, when we talk about homelessness, it's a huge problem, right? you've got to break it into subgroups. So we have to figure out how to address veterans homelessness, chronic homelessness, homelessness for families. Each of those groups need different sets of services. And so Built for Zero is a group of individuals that provides consulting for communities so we can get best practices. We can find out that something great happened in Iowa. Hey, this really worked. We can find out, change our program, and implement it. Because we don't want to keep just doing the same thing. There are people hurting. How do we do this better? Every day I work with professionals that care and want to make a difference. And so that's what we're trying to do. Can you guys read that very well? Okay. Somebody in the back said no. These are the things that, just a few of the things that the city and the county are doing. The county and the city have both invested in providing funding so that we can have a staff for our collaborative. In the past, there is a great deal of work that is required to be done so that we can get funding into our community. It's done on a volunteer basis by people that all have full-time jobs trying to help people get homes. And so we need someone focusing on coordinating not only the work that, say, behavioral health is doing, but then how are they going to coordinate with Dignity hospitals, or how are they going to coordinate with us at the Bakersfield Homeless Center? We need someone doing that work. They've invested to make that happen. Kern Behavioral Health funded something that we had a huge hole in our game in, and that they funded flood ministries for outreach teams. In the past, I think we had 3 people trying to cover the entire county. Isn't that right? 3. Isn't that insane? And you're supposed to be out everywhere over a county the size of Rhode Island trying to find individuals to help them. They have invested significantly, and we now have 12 workers? 15. Sorry, this is Jim Wheeler. He's the Executive Director of Flood Ministries and one of the people that I admire and get to work with every day. Both the city and the county have given contracts to our job development program at the Bakersfield Homeless Center. We're able to employ individuals that are either homeless, formerly homeless, and we have over 80 people involved in that program. The county has announced that they are going to be opening their low barrier navigation center on 22nd and O. They are pushing forward with that. That's going to be 150 beds. The city, at City Council last week, asked to have additional meetings with the community to see, people want to understand what's happening. So the council said, let's pause, let's have a real conversation with everybody in the community that this might affect, where we're talking about placing this, and get additional information. And so that's going to be the pause until January. We'll see how that moves forward. We know we need additional beds. And then finally, the city is also committed to expanding current shelters so that we can increase capacity at the facilities we already have. So there'll be an additional 40 beds at the Bakersfield Homeless Center and an additional 40 beds at the Bakersfield Rescue Mission. And so that's a whole lot of information over a really weighty topic really fast. So if you have any questions, please put those on the card. And then normally I ask for questions, but I don't think I'm supposed to take them right now. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gill. Folks, keep in mind if you have questions for the panelists, please write those down on the note cards. And our wonderful, sensational sophomores, raise your hand. They're very smart. They will pick those up, okay? All right. With that, we will now turn it over to Mr. Morrissey.
Good evening. I want to thank you for having us here. I want to start by affirming how frustrating and challenging this issue is. And thank you for your presentation and the good work that you are doing here in Bakersfield. My name is Shawn Morrissey. I work for an organization called Union Station Homeless Services in Pasadena. This is my second go around there with them. For the most part, most of my career has been at the level of direct service at the street level, doing outreach, and then later housing navigation and what we call permanent supportive housing services. And more recently, this past year, fell into this role of advocacy, and that grew out of an event that happened in Pasadena where we had identified a motel in one of the kind of the eastern part of Pasadena. It seems like all the bad motels are on the east side of any city, but a motel that was particularly problematic, had a lot of issues around it, a lot of prostitution, police calls and things like that. And what we were trying to do was purchase this motel and turn it into really nice permanent supportive housing with all of the attendant on-site support services, the thing that we know really solves homelessness. And what happened was in presenting this to the community, the city really we didn't do our homework. And so this idea was presented and it was immediately shouted down by the community, who did not want homeless folks living in that part of the community. Even though homeless folks were already living in that part of the community, they were on the street. And we recognized at that point that as a sector, we've been doing a really bad job at describing kind of what has happened, why homelessness exists, what caused it, what continues to perpetuate it, who homeless folks are. And so what I've been doing, and I think what this is part of this effort tonight, is to try to give a deeper description of what's going on. In LA County, we housed 21,000 people last year. 24,000 people fell newly into homelessness in the last year. It almost looks like nothing's happening, even though we're housing and helping more people than ever before in the history of homelessness. More and more people are falling into homelessness. There's a physician, a Hungarian physician named Dr. Gabor Mate, and he has a quote. He specializes in homelessness and addiction primarily, but his quote is that addiction is a response to pain, and we need to stop asking why so much addiction and start asking why so much pain. And I think that homelessness is like that. Homelessness is a response to pain. Homelessness is a response to a lot of broken systems and structures and lack of supports. We need to stop asking why so much homelessness and start asking why are these supports not in place, because we tend to think of substance use disorders or mental illness as causes of homelessness, and rather I'd say that these are symptoms of larger systemic and structural breakdowns. They're in a country, in a society as rich with resources and will as ours. There should never be an instance where a mental health crisis or a substance abuse disorder results in homelessness. It just shouldn't be. We should have something else in place that addresses that before it happens, kind of to address it at the top of the river before it ends up at the bottom. A couple other things I'd like, and so the idea that we have more and more homeless folks, it's not as if 50 years ago people started making worse decisions than ever before in the history of humanity. It's that there were breakdowns in structures and systems that largely had nothing to do with the individuals who then suffered from becoming homeless. And that's the case today. We're not making worse decisions than ever before. We have fewer and fewer supports. We have barrier-ridden treatment and mental health systems. We have this expanding wealth gap. We have a housing crisis. If you're homeless and on the street and you want to avail yourself of mental health help or psychiatric medication, basically what that requires, and remember that you have to do this from a place of having no foundational base. Maybe you're sleeping in the bushes. You're supposed to show up for an orientation that could go 3 to 4 hours. You're then invited back to another meeting where you have your eligibility done and you meet with a therapist. And at the end of that, if you're lucky, you're handed an appointment to see a psychiatrist, and that can be anywhere from 30 to 90 days out. That's typically what our mental health system looks like. Until recently with Medi-Cal drug enhancements, basically you were looking at 6 to 8 weeks to get a detox bed if you wanted to avail yourself of substance use treatment, and a couple of months to get into an inpatient treatment bed. And again, up until recently, if you stayed in a treatment program longer than 90 days and you were chronically homeless, you then lost your chronic homeless status, which meant that the housing track that you were on was basically over with, and you would then have to be on the street for another year before you could be eligible again for that same type of solution. It's only recently that we've started to find workarounds for those types of issues. But during all of this, the numbers have grown and grown and grown. It's taken us 50 years to realize that the solution for homelessness is an actual home, right? And we know that now. And I'll talk a little bit about Pasadena. In 2010, we implemented for the first time housing first interventions at the city level, and we created a project called Project House Pasadena. It's where Dorothy and I met for probably the second or third time. The first time Dorothy and I met was around 2005, maybe 2006, and at that point we were working under this housing readiness model that you described, the model that said if you went into the shelter and you could stay abstinent and you could be med compliant and you could get a job and you could jump through all the right hoops, then you would have earned your housing. And that was great for all the folks for whom that worked and who could do that. And it left behind all the folks who weren't able or ready to do that, or didn't have the resources to do that. And when Dorothy and I first met, I was working in a homeless access center, and that's all I had to offer. And at that time in her life, she wasn't able to jump through those hoops. So flash forward 4 years later, where we now have a process in place by which we're identifying and prioritizing folks who are desperately in need. The criteria was those who would die on the street if left on the street for an additional year. And we helped Dorothy move into housing. And she'll tell you a little bit about her story. In that year, in 2010, we had 1,216 folks on the street in Pasadena. Last year, our count was at 542. We're one of the few cities who had an actual reduction in homelessness. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Part of it has to do with Pasadena being its own continuum of care, and just the long history and the number of nonprofits that are there, but also this implementation of housing first model and solution. And Louis was talking about relationship, and for us that is the key. Is the relationship. You know, the models that we've worked under in the past, which were emergency shelter compliance models, again, worked well for a small group of people, but it left a whole bunch of folks out there who just couldn't do it. You know, we're a country that prides ourselves in individualism, you know, and we like to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, and sometimes there are no bootstraps, and sometimes there are no boots, and so we need these other interventions in place to help folks. And permanent supportive housing for folks who are chronic and vulnerably homeless looks like this. You get a subsidy, you go into housing, you pay 30% of your income, so everybody's paying 30% of their income. Nobody's in free housing. There is no such thing as far as I know. And you're also provided intensive support services that stick with you permanently or as long as you need them. They're highly successful models that we're describing. But because of all of these other issues that we've talked about, this is why with as many people as we're putting into housing, more and more folks are becoming homeless. I'll cover a couple more things. I don't know how long I've been talking, but In the 16 years that I've been doing direct service, I have yet to meet one homeless person who did not want their own kitchen, their own bathroom, or their own bedroom. The idea that there are people who would rather live outside is a myth. I've just never experienced that. What I have experienced is a whole lot of systems that were unable to bend to meet the needs of the individual, and rather forced the individual to bend to meet the requirements of the program or the housing. And so we've hopefully done away with that under the Housing First model. And I guess the biggest message I have tonight is I'm not a big fan of the term the homeless. We've kind of reduced a whole group of people who are experiencing this very traumatic temporary life event as this category of the homeless. It's kind of like this defining personality trait or characteristic. And the idea here is that everybody who is sleeping outside is suffering a trauma right now, a trauma that may bring about the mental illness. So mental illness might not even have been in place prior to homelessness. These are traumas that bring about substance use disorders. And that they're human beings, that everybody out there wants the exact same thing, the same longings, desires, hopes, dreams that everybody sitting in this room. And most of that starts with a foundation and a place to live. Homeless folks look scary. They haven't slept, they haven't bathed. And if you had seen me in 2002, when I was dropped off or washed up at the shelter where I now work, I had 2 black eyes, my lip was split up to my nose, I had a gash in my forehead, I had no underwear, and I was wearing a contact lens, it wasn't even mine, it was somebody else's. And my hair was everywhere, and I was wild-eyed, and I looked about as scary as anybody out there on the street. I had my own long-term traumas and the lack of supports and no safety net that resulted in lifelong IV drug use that later led into homelessness. But I want to tell you that I'm the face of homelessness. Dorothy is the face of homelessness. This is what happens when you create relationships, authentic relationships with human beings, and you come into community with them and you offer the proper love, nurture, and appropriate supports. People get better. So by virtue of having 4 walls and a roof over your head, that is a stabilizing effect that really nothing else does. And that begins the journey of health and forward movement. Without housing in place first, we don't have anything. You cannot recreate your life while you're sleeping in a bush. There's not one more thing that homeless folks sleeping on the street can do to make their lives better. You've heard about the barriers in these systems. What we really need to do is change systems, change structures, and change the way that we look at folks who are living on the street. We have too long been confusing the people who are experiencing the problem as being the problem.
That's right.
Thank you.
And folks, as we get Dorothy's PowerPoint set up, any questions, please fill out note cards, pass them to the side. And after Dorothy's presentation, we're going to start the Q&A session, and we're going to open it up to CSUB students first. So if you're a CSUB student, you have a question after Dorothy speaks, please make your way to the left or the right side. So before I introduce Dorothy, I want to give a quick anecdote. So if you know me, you know I went homeless a long time ago voluntarily, right? I slept on the streets of San Francisco. I panhandled, slept in the shelters, and I came home and I wrote about it. And even though that is altruistic in a sense, it doesn't compare to actually living that life. And now I want to introduce Dorothy to give us her story and her journey. Dorothy Edwards.
Hi, everybody. Is that good? Okay. Thank you for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here tonight, and I'm very grateful to be chosen to come up and speak to you. So my name's Dorothy, and I'm in my late years, getting up into my later years, midlife, whatever you call it, past that. But so I was homeless in Pasadena due to domestic violence, and Pasadena is a city that thrives on recovery. So I was actually in Pasadena trying to learn how to live clean and sober, and I was in a residential program at first, and then I met this guy, and then I left the program because I got a job at a restaurant, and then I left with him into a motel. We lived there for 6 months, and we moved into an apartment, and for 3.5 years everything was great, and then I relapsed. And then I lied about it, and then he relapsed, and then we relapsed together, and the next 3.5 years were pure hell. I was beat up pretty bad in the end, and I couldn't go to work. I had 2 black eyes, a job I had for 4 years. I was never late, never missed a day, worked split shifts. I was really trying to change my life, and my relapse took me right back, probably even further down from where I was when I first started. So I got out in the streets there in Pasadena, and the hours turned into days, and the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months, and the months turned into years, and I became heavily, heavily addicted to meth, and I just ran. I was running from reality. I was running from anybody. I didn't seek any help housing because I've never had children, so I thought, well, they're not going to help me. I'm all by myself, and I'm not working. And one night I was sleeping, it was rough out there. A lot of sexual predators, a lot of abuse, verbal, emotional, sexual, police. A lot of abuse from the police. I've been arrested so many times through my life for the stupidest stuff. It's like now that stuff's all legal, and I went to prison for it. I've been in every prison in this state except for 2, for stupid stuff, just possession of drugs or under the influence. It was so stupid. So that's where taxpayers' money goes, to criminalize. And actually, I never had the stability of a home since I was 12 years old when my parents filed for divorce, and that was my trauma, my personal trauma, because we were a very tight family, and we camped all the time and water skiing and built-in swimming pool and the boat and the camper traveling, and it was gone. And I took it really hard because I was really spoiled. And then so I went to live with my mom, and I became a very rebellious person. My dad, it was always yes sir, no sir, yes ma'am, no ma'am. My mom was like, what the F, And it totally changed me, so I became like a rebel. And I just never settled down after that. And I just, all my life I ran, and I ran, and I ran, and I ran. I ran through Bakersfield once, hitchhiking down from Washington State, and the highway patrol caught me taking a bath in the aqueduct. And he asked me, how did you get in there? And I said, I crawled over that fence. God, crazy stuff. So housing first, well, so I was, okay, first off, I was running from the guy that abused me. He was following me all over the place. Everywhere he'd find where my camp was, the police were involved, and blew that spot. So I started sleeping on the rooftops of local businesses, in storefronts where it was well lit up. I just, moving around all the time. And then, so the police kept harassing me, and I thought one time, I said, you know what, I'm so tired of these sheriffs always harassing me. I'm gonna go over that freeway fence, and it's gonna be state property, and then the Caltrans or Highway Patrol will have to come have me move. So but before that happened, I was sleeping on a sofa at the Goodwill where they deliver the donations, and it was turned backwards with the back of the sofa towards the street. And these headlights came up, and they were, all these people got out. It was like aliens. You could see their legs and the headlights, and all these people, it was like blinding. And they were calling my name, and they were calling my dog's name. They were going, Gunner, Gunner. And I'm like, how did they know who are these people? So that's when they were doing a point-in-time count, a homeless count, and they did the VI-SPDAT, which is a vulnerability index. And I was most likely to die on the streets within a year if I was left out there. Oh, I forgot I have pictures. Is that it? Is it upside down? Oh, there. Yeah. So, as you can see, I didn't have a barber. So it's really rough out there on the streets. I mean, look at my broom. I had to put my name on it. Homeless people steal from homeless people. So when they came and they did the VI-SPDAT, and then Housing Works, the agency that I work for today, they came, and everywhere I went there was a business card. And at the time, Shawn Morrissey worked at Housing Works. And like Shawn said, I knew him from when he worked at Passageways, and then he, I knew him through the homeless services, and I never imagined that he would be my coworker, and then my colleague or anything like that. And what we do together today, it's just phenomenal. So when they came and they would leave a business card and it said, Dorothy, call me, Dorothy, call me, and I was like. And I was using a lot of meth, and I was really strung out bad, and I didn't trust anybody. And I'm like, who are these people? What do they want? I'm just, going through it. And finally, they caught up with me, and they go, Dorothy, you don't understand, man. We have a house for you. And I said, oh, yeah, well, show me. And you know what? They did. And I've lived there 7.5 years. Yeah, isn't that awesome? I have a beautiful bungalow built in 1937 with all the beautiful, quaint, charm, and it's home. It's a home. It's something I've never had since my parents split up when I was a teenager, a young adult, 12 to 15 years old, custody battle. I just, they wanted me to choose who to live with, and I couldn't do that. I just would rather run away and just be on my own because I wasn't hurting nobody that way except for myself, I guess. So the first thing I did is I took my addiction into my housing with me, because it is a housing first. And I was one of those people, like Shawn says, about jumping through the hoops, and you go so far, and then I call it the chutes and ladder effect. If you remember that game, chutes and ladder, to get up so high, right back. And that's where a lot of money goes, a lot of self-respect and dignity goes with it. And it took me to a really dark place, always feeling like I was incapable of succeeding at anything. So finally, my landlord, he saw that I had somebody living there that was running back and forth to cars, and he said, that ain't gonna get it, and he gave me an eviction notice. And so Housing Works came, they had an intervention. You were there, right? Shawn Morrissey and Molly Lowry, the founder of Housing Works, and my landlord and I swore I would change, because you know what? I didn't want to go back out on the streets. I didn't want to live hand to mouth every day and just worry, is my sister gonna come searching for me and find me dead behind a dumpster somewhere in this beautiful city that I love so much? And that was my biggest fear, is my sister and my family. And I was so far away from my family, so isolated, that they didn't know if I was dead or alive anyway. They filed missing persons things on me, and I just never could reply because I was ashamed of the way I was. I was ashamed of who I had become, and I felt better that they weren't involved. And today I'm all reunited with everybody. And I love my family, I love my sisters, my nieces, my nephews, and we're like all over Facebook and social media. And but what I do today is I give what was given to me. I work as an enrichment services coordinator and in a Housing First building. And it is exactly as they say, it's a intensive supportive services team. And we all work hand in hand, the case management team, and we help the individuals, like when I got housed, I couldn't go grocery shopping. I didn't know how to pay my bills. I've been homeless all my life. But, you know, I teach people that. I teach them money management. I have AA groups. I have birthday parties, breakfast together. You know, we just do everything. And I've been there over 4 years at that building. The day it opened, I, you know, signed the leases with everybody, and I'm still there, and I could not see myself anywhere else. And I can't see where they would be without me there, because they really, really rely on me, and like I did on Shawn. I mean, this man went to the psychiatrist with me while I sat there and just cried and cried about a kidnapping that happened to me, that I have PTSD from, that I thought I would never get over. I'm over it. You know, I got the help I needed, and I don't do drugs. But I do drink a glass of wine with dinner sometimes. White wine, I like it. A nice glass of Chardonnay. You know, but it's not too often. I don't have alcohol in my home. My dog, I have, unfortunately, oh, let me show you my dog. Sorry. Tore up. There's me sneaking back to my camp. There's me, oh my God, ready to die. Isn't that a beautiful smile? Isn't that a shame? And that was my dog Gunner. This is how homeless people, this is, in order for me to survive, to take a shower, wash my hair, brush my teeth, 5-gallon bottles of water in a shopping cart in the middle of the night. That's a hard way to live. I mean, I see every day, I'm in my shower getting ready for work. I'm so grateful for what I have. I'm so grateful I have hot water and the convenience of going to my refrigerator and grabbing a snack. And it's what I want, not what somebody gave me. It's, you know, something I picked out at the store for myself. It's just changes you, and it gives you dignity, and it gives you faith and hope to carry on and to give that away to somebody else. And that's what I do. And then there's me flying my sign. It says, please help homeless and disabled, because I was totally disabled. When you're a drug addict, you are disabled, you know. So today, I'm on the National Board of Directors at Corporation for Supportive Housing, which is a community development financial institute. And their headquarter office is on Broadway, New York City. So now I go to New York a lot. I travel all over the country. But when I get to JFK, or when I get to the Miami airport, like last month, they have a sign with my name on it, and it's my driver. You know, it's like all pinch me moments that I'm just so grateful that I lived through that, because I was alone out there, and I kept myself alone because I didn't trust anybody. And that was just because I was afraid of getting hurt. And like Shawn said, you know, there's a trauma why you use drugs. And so at 55 years old, when I got housed, the first thing I did, I went into an outpatient, and that's the first thing in my life that I ever graduated. It took a year and a half, though. They kept me there for 3 turnarounds. And the second thing was I graduated from the Corporation for Supportive Housing Speak Up Advocacy Training Program, where we go and we speak to policymakers all the way from Sacramento to DC. And the third thing I did is I graduated from California Consortium of Addiction Professionals and Programs, and as a drug and alcohol counselor. So I'm super good at that. I just know I tell people, don't use. You know? Be like me, don't use. It's that easy, one day at a time, you know? But I'm very blessed. Today I have people that I have the opportunity to give them their 1-year clean and sober birthday cake. And then what I got in return was a ribbon from the Special Olympics, 3rd place for basketball. And that's the most rewarding thing in my whole job. That was inside my tent. If you ever wonder what a homeless tent looks like inside, usually they're not what you imagine. They're pretty cool. I had an extraordinary camp, though. And there's Shawn. That's on the front porch of my camp. I had an 8-by-16-foot patio with lounge chairs and tables and plants and fruit bowls and a little garden, solar lights. And this is my home, and that was my dog. That was Gunner. I love him. And then there's Gunner and I. He was my tried and true hero when it came to homeless advocacy. And thank you.
Thank you, Dorothy. Please, one more round of applause to all our panelists. So at this point, we're going to move to the Q&A session. I'm going to ask the sensational sophomores to collect the cards. And in the meantime, first we're going to open it up to CSUB students who would like to come to the mic for questions. So CSUB students, do not be shy. I may call on you or I may not. So as we get started, I'm going to pose the first question. But before I do, I'd be remiss if I didn't recognize CSUB President Lynette Zalesky. Please give her a round of applause for being here. Always a pleasure. Also, Mayor Go, please give her a round of applause as well. And lastly, I will note, my fiance is here. Yes. I think she still loves me. Give her a round of applause, Estella Sanchez. So, our first question to the panelists is a general one. So the question is, how do we as a community define homelessness? How do we define it?
I think there's, there's the kind of broad definition. It's anybody who doesn't have a home or who is struggling with housing instability. A lot of the programs that we work under are have to work under HUD's definition of homelessness, and so that's a little bit different. And when we're talking about chronic homelessness, the way that we define that according to the federal government is anyone who is living in a place not meant for human habitation for a year or more. That could be shelter, street, or a car, or and that has a disabling condition, or has experienced multiple episodes of homelessness over the past 3 years that amount to a year or more. That's the HUD definition, and so based upon that, we're kind of sometimes stuck or limited to which housing solutions or avenues we can connect people to based upon that definition. But there's all sorts of different types of homelessness, not the least of which is students who are experiencing homelessness. That's a huge and rising population as well.
That's actually the next question. And at this point, I'll open it up to all other audience members. If you'd like to pose a question, you can now make your way to the microphones. The next question, and Shawn, if you could take this one first, and then Louis and Dorothy. The question is, what about homeless college students? The audience member noted no one has spoken about this yet. And a recent study for BC students noted that there are roughly 932 college students at BC who qualifies or thinks of themselves as homeless. So if you could talk on that aspect, we'd appreciate it.
Did you say you wanted him to start?
You can take it, Louis.
Oh, all right. It's not right that somebody in school doesn't have a home. It's pretty simple. Now, what are we going to do about that? Well, we got to figure out how to provide a subsidy so an individual can have a home. Does that need to be constructed housing here on campus? That often makes the most sense. That's not inexpensive. If somebody happens to have a car, why do we not have safe parking programs at every university or community college in our state? That doesn't make sense. For those of you who don't know what safe parking is, it's if somebody's going to be living in their car and that's where they choose to live, we need to make bathrooms, showers available to them. There needs to be a location where they can securely park, where it is safe. They are not going to get harmed or hassled for being there. Those are ways that we can address that, and that's just two real quick.
I guess the only thing I could add to that is this idea that I think a lot of students are homeless because there's a choice here between, am I going to go to school or am I going to live in a home? And oftentimes people can't have both. They just can't afford to do both at the same time. And how insane is that, you know, that you have to choose school over having a place to sleep.
Thank you, Shawn and Louis. In Bakersfield, I want to say this summer, there's the introduction of the Rapid Response Team. And this team, they sort of go to sites or encampments where folks set up homeless camps. Mm-hmm. And the idea is to essentially remove those camps, right? So this question is, what is being done about the displacement of the homeless population? Is it legal to export the homeless by offering them incentives such as bus tickets or money? And how are we going to coordinate with other areas to prevent this?
So first I'm going to deal with the elephant in the room in that question, which is every community that I talk to believes that other communities are shipping homeless individuals to them. Am I not loud enough? My mic is cutting out? No, okay. Got it. So, how many people have heard that LA, Sacramento, San Francisco, Santa Barbara is shipping people to us? Right! I cannot tell you how often we deal with this. So, some of the best data that I have seen was recently provided by Flood Ministries. Flood Ministries goes out, they do our street outreach. They are making contact with the individuals that are living outside. From April to the end of October, they made contact with 490 unique individuals. So that's a decent sample size of those that were outside. Now, what did we find out? Well, lo and behold, that when we asked them where their prior residence was, and we say, was it in Metro Bakersfield? Was it in Kern County? If we include all the zip codes for Kern County, it was close to only 4% said they were homeless from somewhere outside of Kern County. So guess what, folks? It's our neighbors. It's our neighbors that are falling out of housing. And how we respond to the crisis that they find themselves in is going to be the measure of us. And I'm just not standing by. Now, the other piece of the question was? Rapid response. That's right. So there's some very legal steps that any municipality or county has to take before they're able to remove possessions for somebody. They have to go out to a camp. They have to flag the camp and say that we are going to be removing these possessions. A lot of the complaints that if you talk to the city or the county that they are receiving is the trash that gets accumulated at sites. Also, lo and behold, a body does what a body does, and if you don't have a toilet, there's going to be mess. And so all of that is what they're going out and cleaning up. The rapid response team for the first time is focused on that work, going out and cleaning things up.
Thank you, Louis.
I just want to jump in. I want to just affirm that first part, it's a myth that people are coming from outside of the area. It's one we hear a lot, and in Pasadena we're at 5%, so that number is right around the same. 5% of folks are reporting they've come from somewhere else. People who become homeless tend to stay in the areas where they lived before. That their supports, their families, their friends, their their doctors are all in those areas. And though people may sometimes wander into other areas, the statistics show that people stay or come back to the area that they've grown up in or lived in prior to them becoming homeless.
Thank you, Shawn. We've got some questions on the side. Please step forward and pose your question.
Hi, I'm a student at Bakersfield College. And my question is simply, what does one do or how can one help with those who are so addicted to drugs or simply mentally ill or disabled that they aren't really fully capable of seeking that help? Do we as individuals, or do we initiate the help, or do we go to advocates like you guys and tell you guys and then you enforce the help?
Yeah, I will hog this mic if I'm allowed to. So, so first and foremost, I think that what's happening under the Housing First model is that we are housing folks who have chronic and acute mental health conditions and substance use disorders. And the idea, and I think the first part of what I was trying to talk about is to explain that even when people are willing, which they largely are, to receive help, because nobody wants to be, totally screwed up and living outside, that there are so many barriers and impediments to getting that help that it's nearly impossible for an individual to navigate them from a foundation of homelessness. And that the Housing First model doesn't require that any of those solutions be in place immediately, that the idea is to take someone in all their dysfunctional pathological glory and put them into their own apartment and then do all of these services in housing. So all of the wraparound services in housing. And the idea being that if you can create a safe and nurturing environment, that people are more likely to receive that help. I think Dorothy described that perfectly. So substance use disorders, mental illness are not barriers to getting into housing. The barriers that we have are around not having enough housing. We have hundreds of people we know over 90% of the folks who are homeless in our area, they're in the system, they're on track for housing solutions, they're holding housing vouchers in their hand, and these vouchers are expiring because we can't find housing for people. The problems that we hear about, all of these attendant issues, are issues that happen in full view of the public. So the largest population of untreated mental illness and untreated drug addiction are folks who are living in homes who have never been homeless. But all of these crises are happening behind closed doors, so we don't see them. People who are having these crises on the street are highly visible, and so that becomes the thing that we focus on. We focus on the pathology of the individual and not the systems that have created these pathologies that we're looking at. What you don't hear about are these issues happening inside housing when people go into homes, because that is the solution. People get better when they go into homes. So we've been doing Housing First for 10 years. At the end of 10 years, nobody's saying people who are going into houses are just as screwed up as they were on the street. We're still talking about the folks who are on the street who are experiencing all of this. So I don't know that's an exact answer to your question, but we don't consider those conditions as barriers to helping people move forward. We consider the fact that there is no housing to put them in as the barrier.
If and when they do lapse, do you just restart the process as them going back in and just not keep going, but kind of sort of each time if they relapse?
We never stop the process. So relapse doesn't end the help that we're giving people. We have people who are actively using substances, actively experiencing mental health systems that we are moving toward housing the whole time. So that's a baseline for a lot of people. It's not the idea that people were forced to have to be sober and take medication previously was part of what created the problem that we're looking at. The solution is that we don't make that a requirement of participation in the programs. We look to the housing and the relationships that we're creating with people to begin the kind of healing and health enhancing process. So it's not a problem if people are using or mentally ill. Again, the problem is not having anywhere to put people.
Thank you.
So we'll go to the right side of the room.
Hello, I wanted to ask a two-part question. I've been reading a lot lately, seeing rumblings, basically where specialists are saying that homelessness and the crises in the country is a direct result of competitive capitalism. And with that being said, more or less an irreversible trend. And I just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on that. And the second part of that question would be, I lost it. I'll let you answer and then I'll have it.
I missed the first part. So I'm sorry.
can ask
I have
again.
reached an age where not everything makes it to my ears. So
I'll ask again.
Please.
Okay, I've been reading and studying and kind of just like looking at think tanks and different things like that. And what people are starting to say more and more is that homelessness and the crisis is a part of competitive capitalism. And, you know, it kind of began from the top, something that we're just kind of kicking at the goads against, more or less, trying to put a dent in quite admirably. But where would be your thoughts on this? Is this something that us, from a governmental standpoint, will have to look at as we look at new solutions going into the future?
So I would tell you that, and now we're into personal belief, right?
Yes.
As opposed to systems of care that provide
Yes.
assistance. What I would tell you is that, in my opinion, capitalism is the best system for the distribution of goods and services that we know of currently. What I will tell you is that there are certain tools that can be used by government to encourage that system to invest in low-income housing. One of the things that used to be used and was part of our cities was called redevelopment agencies. And so what they were able to do was provide subsidy to business in order to incentivize the creation of low-income housing. So they could make the note pencil, right? So if you got the assistance, you could build a specific type of housing, hold the rents to a level that was affordable. But in like 2008, I believe, is when the state went through the crisis. They eliminated the redevelopment agencies, and that has never been replaced. And so the development of low-income housing has fallen off dramatically. And so that is a serious problem. The problem that we don't have a way to encourage that type of development is a concern.
Excellent, thank you. And the second part of that question is looking forward to 2020 elections. I hear both sides making somewhat credible arguments regarding what to do with homeless, but I know it's not a bipartisan issue per se, but when looking where to put my vote, I know this is going to be a tough one, but what side do you think has some of the best, most reasonable and effective policies regarding curbing homelessness?
At the federal level,
Yes.
I would tell you that I've yet to hear something that has encouraged me.
On either side?
We have the systems that are currently in place. I have not heard of anything proposed that would radically change the systems that we have now. HUD is the biggest mechanism that the federal government has for investment in homeless services. It's an aircraft carrier. It does not turn quickly. It is a big old thing that takes time. And so I have yet to hear of a proposal that has lit a fire under me and said, that's a great idea.
Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm also a BC student. One of my biggest questions is, I know that with housing authorities going up, one of the public's main concerns are crime rates. And not students, but people who are just not willing to get better. What threat does that pose to the community, and how is that expected to be battled?
So the question is, how does crime rates relate to homelessness? Is that the question?
More or less, in what the public should expect as these housing authorities are going up, and what will be done to ensure security, I guess, for the rest of the public.
Well, Shawn, did you want to take this? Okay.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit to it. First of all, I don't believe that people aren't willing to get better. I just believe, again, that the systems are not in place that allow people to easily get better. Statistically, folks who are homeless are more victims of crime as opposed to perpetrators of crime. I mean, we're actually lighting homeless folks on fire now. That's how fatigued we are with this whole problem. And again, kind of per capita, I think that it's not that homeless folks don't commit crime. I think we've criminalized homelessness largely too, because some of the crimes are a result of just, living in a homeless state. But homeless folks aren't violent. They're not necessarily criminals. I've had worse interactions with the person I cut in front of at the grocery store than I've ever had with anybody on the street. So I think that it just goes. Those are issues that happen everywhere with people who are housed and people who are not housed. I think that homeless folks are more in danger of having violence visited upon them than they are committing those.
Thank you, Shawn. We'll go to the right.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me there, Chris?
Yes, I can.
Yes, my name is Robert Jack Hudspeth, and I had the privilege tonight when I came in here to meet Chris, and casually knew Mr. Gill. I got to meet the gentleman there in the middle. I didn't get to meet the lady on the end, but I want you guys to know that I truly enjoyed everything I heard you talk about. Now, we might have a slight little differential there on the percentile of people that's brought into the area. And the reason I say that is because I don't have nothing but time on my hands. And trust me, man, I'm all about the mind. And I like to read and know about what my community's doing, what they're involved in. And the deal that I seen on the percentage of imported people in the Kern County was 17%. I told my wife when I seen that number up on the screen of the TV, I said, now hell, that's quite a few people. And I'd encountered a deal down at McDonald's one morning where a young lady, and you can spot people that are up against it. And I said, God told me, he said, hey, go talk to that woman, see if you can help her. And so I went over and interviewed her, and I said, honey, where are you from? She said, I'm from Madeira. And I said, are you a street person? She says, yeah. And I said, how did you get down there? What's the story? She said, well, they bought me a ticket and put me on the bus and said, you're going to Bakersfield. And so I said, well, okay. And so it touched my heart, and I went over to Teen Challenge, and I had met the lady that was assistant director there, and I told her about the story, and I said, look, can you do anything to help this young lady? She said, Jack, go back and get her. Bring her over here. I'll give her a new set of clothes. She can clean up. I'll give her a bed for tonight. She'll be fed and everything. Now, look, I don't know how much studying. I know the panel up there. You people are all brilliant, and that's your job. And I don't want to find a differential between educated folks and just a normal guy like me. But I'm all about the mind. And I'm a writer, and I write a lot. And when I met Chris, I sent in a little card up there, 3 words on that card, definition of homelessness. Now, I realize the gentlemen like Shawn and Louis and up there that are working with these situations every day, they're on the main battle lines. But I'm here to tell you, we got to reach out a little further, because just recently, I wrote a little article, and I sat in my little allotted area there at home. I call it the war room, and I put down some stuff. The battle lines are drawn. Let me explain to you what that little sentence means. I told Chris there earlier, I said there's at least 3 and potentially 4 different facets right here in town that are going to be pulling against each other on this homelessness situation. And now let me explain to you what that's about. We see the church organizations, the differential that they felt about having a particular project in their area, different things, people griping about where the deal's going to be over off of Golden State Avenue. Now, what I'm trying to tell you and explain to you, and I think Louis said it best, and I watch him on TV all the time, and he says nobody really wants a homeless scenario in their neighborhood. And out there where I live, the people would freak out if I said I'm going to do something like that. Well, I'm the only guy that you'll probably ever meet. Months ago, I got a hold of Sacramento, a lawyer up there that had got Governor Brown on his way out the door to sign a deal on that new deal for the mini homes. I don't give a damn if you like it or not. It's where I live, I call it 6.5 Oaks. Makes my wife mad. She said, Jack, don't do that. Why do you do that? I said, well, when I left Oildale, I didn't quite get to the golf course, so here we are in 6.5 Oaks. and that really makes her mad. But when I got a hold of this girl, the secretary for this attorney in Sacramento, and we talked, and Governor Brown had signed that legislation. Now, I was the first one I know here in town that had the big copy of all the rules and regulations for that new scenario about the tiny home. Don't give a damn if you like it. I might not like it either, but it's law now. But what I tell people, look here, whether you're over in the Westchester group and you don't like the way the road is bending, or you don't like this, if you want to go hire Chris as an attorney to take on this battle, spend $20,000, don't bring that damn bill to me as a taxpayer and say, hey, you're going to have to pay for, we lost this case, so you're going to have to divvy up, and we're going to pay this out of the general fund. You got to be careful about when you tax the people. It's like that the new 51 or 52 $million that they tuck in on that tax scenario.
Jack, let me. I want. Do you have a question? I want to make sure we get the panelists involved, because I love where you're going. Right. What you're posing is, if we want remedies and solutions, we have to have some sort of balance with the tax part.
I agree.
Is that right?
Yeah,
and where do we find the funding for those solutions? Is that fair?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. My only question, and I'll shut up here because I'm really passionate about this. But a lot of folks, you know, God made us. He tweaked us all a little bit different, so we'll think a little bit different outside of the box. I'm a guy that likes to think about how do we solve a problem, how do we build something at a cost that is cheaper than other things, and how can we get the corporations maybe that would jump in and want to be part of this. Them are the kind of problems that I can answer. So if you like what you hear there, talk to me and I'd be glad to answer it. You know?
Absolutely. Jack, make sure you stick around afterwards. We'd love to continue the conversation. We'll come to the right side of the room.
Hi, I'm a BC student as well. I was wondering what are some things we as individuals can do to help combat homelessness?
Dorothy, do you want to take that one?
Sure. I'd like to piggyback on what Jack said about the people coming into the city from Madera. And right there, Madera and Chowchilla, they have 2 women's prisons right there. And when you go to prison and you get out, they give you what's called gate money. And you take that gate money and they get you on that bus and they get you out of their town. And when you're an inmate, you don't want to live in a town full of correctional officers either. So, go figure, after you've been dealing with them all that time. So what happens is that bus money that they get there, they get so far, and then they're stuck here. I would suggest, like, even in our community, the faith-based community, they are always looking, to help people get home. Some people really want to just get home to their families, and they just don't have that know-how, the money, and they have a dog, a service animal, and there's just all kinds of stuff. But I just think it's good for the community to help the person do what they want for their next step of their journey, instead of having them come and feel trapped in your town and like they're disrupting your town. It's really an awful feeling to have to be out there feeling like that.
Thank you, Dorothy.
I would just add to, as a community, commit to making sure that if you need shelter, that shelters get built. Figure out how to do that. If you need housing, which I'm guessing is the same issue you're having here that we're having everywhere else, commit to permanent, supportive, and affordable housing being built in your communities. These are solutions. You hear it called homeless housing a lot, and I always like to say there's no such thing as homeless housing. When people go inside and they sign a lease, they are housed, and things begin to get better. So these are the solutions. Commit to those as a community.
And I just got to say this. There's going to be projects that are going to come before the city council. There's going to be projects that's going to come before the board of supervisors. When you hear about them, call your electeds. Tell them you support it. Tell them you want it to happen. Show up at meetings. Fill out a card. Provide public statements and say, this is something we must have. Because there's going to be really difficult situations. I don't care where you locate a facility that's going to provide services for individuals that are homeless, there's going to be angry people. And so those electeds are going to need support. And if we don't provide it for them, we're going to continue to spin.
And those are angry people that are imagining how bad it's going to be when homeless folks move into their area. That's not the reality. In our area, using these models, we have a 96% retention rate. So that's a 96% success rate of people who are chronic and vulnerable, out there for years or decades, who stabilize and begin to thrive once they're in housing with the proper supports.
Yeah, in Kern County, our retention rate is somewhere around 93%.
And Louis and Shawn, what do you say to folks who, in a sense, are not necessarily against helping folks get off the streets, but their concern is more so with protecting my daughter or my son or my family? What do you say to those notions?
Fear-based decisions stink.
I love it.
So if you let fear run you, well, it's going to run you right away. And that means everybody that you look at is a potential problem. Instead of, wow, there's a human that's hurting pretty bad. There's somebody that's suffering. Well, then I get to make a choice. Can I see that human in pain? Or do I have to be afraid? Now, I know that's not easy. Because as Shawn shared, mental health expressing itself in public is not fun. Right? Lives are messy. I don't know a single family in Kern County that hasn't been touched by alcoholism or chemical dependency. That's messy. I have never seen anyone get better without someone loving them first. Right? They have to believe someone believes. They have to believe that someone sees value in them. Because when you are in the middle of pain, you are alone. You are locked up in it. And somebody's got to walk into that pain. Anyway, I'll keep talking, sorry.
Yeah.
I'll walk through it with you. Beautiful.
Yeah, and homeless people are not violent people. I know we fear this, but basically we have two choices. You know, someone who's homeless living on the street in your community without supports, or someone who's living in a home stabilizing with the appropriate supports. They're here no matter what. Do you want them inside, or do you want them, you know, living on the streets still?
Beautiful.
Good night to Louis, Shawn, and Dorothy. So my question here today for you guys, how would you get the community to seek out these homeless people that are in this struggle and help them out when the vast majority, even though we see them and we have them right outside our houses, how do you get the community to look at them and actually help them instead of just turning a blind eye to them and ignoring them?
Who wants to go?
I can always talk. Yeah, I think part of this, thank you for that question. We need to see people as human beings, basically. It's the way that we treat people. Some people are comfortable giving money, some people are comfortable not. Either one, I think, is fine. I think we've become so scared of homeless folks that we avoid them at all costs. And I'm not saying we should all go out and engage homeless people, but I think the beginning of that, the start of that, is to actually start seeing folks as human beings experiencing a temporary trauma or situation.
We've got to start looking at homelessness as a circumstance instead of a character trait. It's that they don't have a home. And there's lots of things that happen because you don't have a place to be clean, you don't have a place to be safe, you never get to truly relax because you're hyper-vigilant at all times for your safety. So what do individuals do? Not allow your heart to shift into something where I see you as a problem. That's really what's happening, is that I'm hearing so many people that have reached the end of their compassion. They say they're fatigued. Well, go a little more. I don't know how many bad choices I made growing up. And thank God there were people to pick me up. And there were people to correct me. There were people to help when I stood the chance of falling out. Not everybody has that kind of safety net. And also, when we talk about pull yourself up by the bootstraps, not everybody is as resilient as the next person. We're all different. And so I keep hearing like there are people that, what about the people that want to live that way? I have yet to meet a person that when you put the right care around them that does not want a stable home of their own, however that is structured. And it's just important that we as a community, there's some tenets that we live by, right? We are a very giving community. We're a very compassionate place. We can't allow anger and fear to push us away from those truths about who we are. Right? I've lived in a lot of different places, and I've never lived in a place where every time we've ever put our hand up and said, you know, we need help, that people don't show up in droves. That's unique. It is a beautiful thing about this community. We can't let fear change that.
I'd like to add, what was most important to me, was someone would come to me with, is resources. Resources that were tried and true, that they weren't to run around taking up my time where I had to push all my stuff and my dog and 6 miles across the city, or risk leaving it out there and taking a bus and coming back to nothing. But just resources that are available, and perhaps bus money, food, but actually resources. Even though I lived in Pasadena before I became homeless, I didn't know anything about the homeless community. And I learned most of it from the other homeless people. And I think that it's important for the whole community to know all those resources and offer that.
Thank you, Dorothy. We will go to the left. And folks, if anyone else has questions, please make your way to the aisles or through the aisles, as this will be the last round of questions for the night. Please.
So I don't exactly remember who I heard this from. I remember this back in high school, but I believe it's from a video. The lady said on there, where if you ever run into a homeless person on the street and they're asking for money, it's better to not give them money. It's better to ask them what they're going to buy, use that money for, and maybe to buy that for them. Like if they want food, to go somewhere and buy them some food, some water, anything like that. It's better to do that, and the reason for that was if you just give them money blindly, they could just go buy cigarettes or alcohol or something. So if I ever get in that situation, or anyone in the audience gets in that situation, what's the better thing to do to help them? Would it be better to just give them money or to go buy them the items that they need?
Now, I want to give this one to Dorothy. I can tell you when I went homeless, I think it was man's inhumanity to man that hurt me the most. When you ask for help, there's no recognition of your humanity. In a sense, you are non-existent. And that, to me, is really what the trauma came from, right? So with that, Dorothy, when you hear those questions, what comes to mind for you?
Well, I think being a woman out there is when you would hand me money, a lot of the times it had nothing to do with cigarettes, even though I smoke, and drugs, even though I was spending money on drugs. But maybe just right then at that time of the month, I didn't have what I needed as a woman out there on the streets. And I didn't want to go up and ask people, excuse me, I really need this product. It's that time of the month for me. And I mean, that's humiliating. The way I look at it, when I was using, and people would give me money, and I would buy drugs with it, I was doing what I had to do to survive out there. I was living with PTSD, I was terrified, and I was afraid to go to sleep at night. And I had a big, big dog to let me know if anybody was coming, and he would have attacked them. But the thing is what I did with it was what I needed to do with it. And it's okay to buy a sandwich and this, but you know, the way I look at it, when you give somebody money and it leaves your hand, it's no longer your money, it's their money. And it doesn't matter what they do with it. That's just how I look at it.
Yeah, I would add to just give without condition if you're going to give, but lead with your heart. Whatever you think is the thing to do, then whatever you're most comfortable, do that. Statistically, nobody's out there making hundreds of dollars a day panhandling. The average homeless person is making around $25 to $35 a day. Most of that goes toward food. Maybe people will get together and get a motel room if they can. But also, as Dorothy said, you know, many of us go home at the end of a very stressful day and have a cocktail, you know, and that's the thing you need at the end of the day, you know. And don't put conditions. If you're going to give, don't put conditions on. I give money to homeless folks all the time, and that's just because for me that feels okay to do. But if it doesn't, that's all right too. Give food, give socks. Don't give anything. Whatever you feel is the thing to do. You're not going to hurt anybody by giving them money.
Thank you, Shawn and Dorothy. Please.
Good evening. I have a comment and a question. As I approached the microphone, my heart started beating really quickly, and I wasn't sure if it was because I was getting nervous, but then I realized it's because I'm so passionate about this. And Gil, you said a lot of things today that touched my heart, and I'm sure touched a lot of people's hearts, and that's just really treating people like people, and not looking at individuals with this judgment, and I think that's something that we've been talking about as well. It's hard too sometimes because we do have these, oh, well, you know, what are they doing on their street? And we have all these perceptions, but I love that connection that you made about you making errors yourself, because I don't think anybody in this room is free of making a mistake, free of doing something wrong or that we regret, that for whatever reason we either weren't incarcerated for or we didn't end up out on the street. And I'll tell you right now that I know what it's like to be a single mom, to have 2 children, and almost be out on the street. And I had to beg my mom, my family member, to let me, to rent her apartment to me. And it was hard. It was humiliating. It taught me some lessons, and I'm teaching here. I mean, there's a lot of things I've gone through that wasn't just handed to me. I also teach in prison, and the perception of how we look at people that are incarcerated too really needs to change. I mean, in order for us to treat people like human beings and heal as a community, I think it begins with just our own perceptions. And lastly, I want to say that I actually opened up an app that's called Nextdoor app, and some of you may be familiar with it. I actually had to turn it off because I was so frustrated and angry because of the conversation that occurred about homeless people and just the comment about treat them like trash. I couldn't believe that people were actually having this conversation. And I thought, what kind of people are we, where we're gonna discourage someone to treat someone because they're homeless, treat them like trash? And so I encouraged and I got into this conversation back and forth, which eventually it was just hopeless. It really was hopeless. I just, why can't you just treat people kindly? I mean, I know it sounds so, so minor, but really, last week after enjoying a wonderful dinner with some friends, I was downtown and I saw a homeless man, and I was just heading to my car. I looked at him, and just without even thinking about it, he and I made eye contact, and I said hi, and he was shocked. Because how often do we actually stop and look and acknowledge people that are living on the street? Just that acknowledgement. If you want to do anything for a homeless person, acknowledge them.
That's right.
You don't have to give them money if you don't want to. Acknowledge that they are there. That is huge. So anyway, I'm sorry. I really had to say that. But my question is, I noticed your pictures, Dorothy, beautiful pictures. And it seems like if someone was following you maybe for a while,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
I would think, because it doesn't look like a selfie, and I wouldn't imagine that you have this professional camera, right? During that time,
I
or maybe you
did,
did. So my question to that is, so someone was following you throughout however many years or months it was, and then eventually this ended up, and it's actually more for the panel really too, and you turned out to have a job out of it, which is remarkable. Is there something that we can do to create a system where we are, when we're pointing and counting people, instead of just counting them and asking them where they live or where they came from, could we start asking them, it sounds really silly, maybe idealistic, but could we start asking them, what kind of job would you like to do? Like, what are your interests, and how can I help you?
Better yet,
How can I
start
help you, right?
training them.
Pardon?
Better yet, start training them what kind of job
Absolutely,
they'd like to do.
and then maybe they could be the ones in the forefront doing what you're doing, Dorothy, so people that can relate to other people that are homeless. I mean, that just is a no-brainer to me, right? You put the people in place that are already going through that, can really relate to that population, right? Because there's some things that I can relate to people with and maybe I can't, but well, I mean, is that a conversation that we're having to maybe solve this problem?
Yes.
And you know what, I think the weight of that question deserves a little bit more time after this question is over, this question Q&A is over. So please stick around. I'm sure Dorothy, Shawn, and Louis would love to chat with you a little bit more in depth. Young man, please step forward.
It's not made for him.
This is in response to Shawn, how he said most crime rates of the homeless are pretty low. Well, I'm a trustee of a very large almond orchard and farm, and we've had, over the past 5 years or so, we've had 2 homeless people trying to live on our farm. And one of them was not there when we saw that they were there, and we wrote a note and laid it on their bed saying, we would like it if you would leave, or we'll probably call the sheriff. And then he came to our house and left a note on our truck that said, you better not mess with my stuff again if you know what's best for you. So I'd just like you to elaborate on the crime rates and stuff more because of what's happened to me.
Yeah, I think that might be a good conversation offline with Louis and some of the panelists. If you mind sticking around, we'd love to go a little bit more in depth. Is that okay? Okay,
Yeah.
awesome.
Can I say something
Yes,
real quick?
absolutely.
Anecdotally, I can tell you many stories of individuals that have acted inappropriately when you approach them. I have seen people that are homeless do that. I have seen business owners do that. And so a lot of it has to do with an individual as opposed to the circumstance that they're homeless.
Yeah, please.
I have 2 questions. One's more of an opinion, but I'll do the more lighter one first. So what are your opinions on the tiny houses? How the tiny houses, the mini houses, they can be constructed and it costs less than $18,000 to even start one. And I was thinking that would be a good project for students from both campuses to actually work on as part of like an internship or like master's degree, that they can actually work together to build a mini house and then work with the county to actually donate it for the homeless, the homeless situation. Yeah, what are your thoughts of tiny houses? Have you heard of them or have you thought about it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I think they're fantastic. I think that we need to figure out how to start putting more of them in place. I think it's an inexpensive way to provide housing. I think we need to figure out how to start putting them in backyards. There's a lot of ways that I think that that's a good thing. There's a lot of rules to build. We've got to work that out. Fortunately, we've got the, what's the tiny home village called? Covey cottages for the veterans that they're putting in county land. So the county has already worked through a lot of those building codes. Hopefully when we get through this project, we're going to have a model that we can replicate inside the city and in other parts of the county.
And then thank you for, oh, do you have another question?
Oh, yeah, that's okay. I also wanted to ask, like, just a little mini background. I had a friend in the past who, because of domestic violence in her household, she couldn't return to the house. And then she lost her own roommate that left the rent for her, so she lost her apartment. She couldn't work during the summer because she only had a job on campus. So she went homeless for a bit, for like a little bit over a year. So I wasn't able to help her because I already have too many people in my household. There's no room in my little house. So she was seeking out like a woman's housing situation for single ladies, but they were all full. Human Services, they said they can't help her much because she's a single woman, she's not a mom. So what options are out there in case another situation like that occurs for students who like have no work and they are at risk of becoming homeless with no backup support?
So in Kern County, there are 5 options available. Let me try again. So first is Alpha House out in Taft. If you happen to be out in that area, it's a very small faith-based program, but it's out there. There's Women's Center High Desert if you're in Ridgecrest, which is a domestic violence emergency shelter. In Bakersfield, we manage the Alliance Against Family Violence and Sexual Assault. We have a 34-bed shelter there. We also have opened up a second one in the city of Delano, which is an additional 30 beds. And I'm missing one. And there's one more. That's awesome. I didn't know that. So CSUB has temporary housing for students that become homeless.
Oh, good to know, good to know. All right, thank
Thank
you.
you. So you have the honor of presenting the last and final question. No pressure, no pressure. You're okay.
You guys are smart.
It's very I'm nervous already. I didn't do well in public speaking, sorry. So I'm from The Runner, for the college newspaper, and I'm actually doing an article about Thanksgiving for the homeless. So I was just wondering, what are the many options that they have if they don't have family or friends or even peers to go to for the holidays? Like, is there events going on in the shelters, churches, or anything? Is there like a lot of options?
There are a number of opportunities. This is one of those times a year where this community shines incredibly. The basics quickly. The Bakersfield, the Mission at Kern County is going to have a Thanksgiving meal on Thanksgiving. The Bakersfield Homeless Center, we will also provide that. At both of our domestic violence shelters, although those are not open to the public, for those families as well. The Bridge Church gives out like 1,000 deep pit turkeys and full meals to families all over this community. There's a very long list of churches that do this work, especially this time of year. So there are a number of options. I know that St. Francis also does a meal over near H Street for Thanksgiving.
Okay, I actually had another question. What are your guys' thoughts? What are your thoughts on Sheriff Youngblood's stance that homeless people should just be put in jail?
I'm sorry?
So the city, the sheriff, there's been notions that potential solutions include folks who are homeless, putting them in jails. What are your thoughts on that notion?
My thoughts are it's wasting a lot of taxpayers' money that could be building housing for these individuals. Bottom line, it's cost effective to house somebody. It costs the taxpayers a lot of money to incarcerate a person. And then that person's just caught in that vicious circle, you know, going back to using drugs, doesn't have that step up and that foundation to take flight and just reimagine his life, her life, and just go with it. And it keeps him in a vicious circle. It's just, to me, it's an ugly, ugly, unfair thing.
Thank you.
And Louis, I will give you the final word.
So societal changes have definitely decriminalized certain offenses that used to require incarceration. The district attorney and our sheriff have been pursuing the concept of being able to respond to some of those crimes. I have not read an entire proposal from them. What I will tell you is that if you talk to the service providers, I don't know anyone that thinks that somebody breaking into somebody's store is okay, or that vandalizing someone's home is okay. You don't get to be violent. There has to be consequences for those types of actions. What I will tell you is that it is a mistaken belief to think that you can incarcerate your way to solving homelessness. That's not going to work that way. Now, what I will tell you, if somebody is incarcerated, they do have a chemical dependency problem, then we now have spent a great deal of money getting a hold of this person, having them in a facility, providing treatment. We have to make sure that that treatment is available when they're released. Okay? Right now, the system's not very good at that. And the sufficient resources don't exist. And this is the thing I've been wanting to say, and I'm just going to go ahead and say it for tonight. We know how to solve homelessness. We have the answer. It's a home. What we don't have is sufficient resources.
Well, folks, that concludes tonight's event. Please, I want to give a round of applause to Dr. Michael Burrows for organizing the event. And please, if we could, give our panelists one more round of applause. All right, folks, safe travels home. Good night.
Thank you, Chris. Let's give Chris a hand.